Yeah, I tried to join the army as a youngster, and I failed on 2 occasions because I was very short-sighted. I had some quite severe eyesight problems, and the military just they wouldn't let me get past that basically. So in 1987 I went around that corner to Blackpool Careers Office and suffered my first knockback, and it devastated me. But my brother, fortunately for him, he was in perfect physical health. He was able to join the army, so I lent him quite heavily because I kind of lived vicariously through him. I thought, well, if I can't be a soldier, at least my brother can be a soldier. So it kind of balances out, and I'll see the world through his eyes. It was quite selfish of me looking back, but he really wanted to join, and I kind of lent him very heavily. And he chose to join the Royal Green Jackets at my instigation again, because he couldn't decide a regiment to join. At the time, I'd just read a huge series of books by a very famous author called Bernard Cornwell, who wrote the Sharper series of books, wonderful novels, set in the Napoleonic era. The original Royal Green Jackets, the Rifles, as they were known then, and are known once again now. So I said to him, you should join the Royal Green Jackets. And he said, who are they? I said, well, you've seen that TV series, Sharp, starring Sean Bean. You've seen the books I've read by Bernard Cornwell. Well, that's the Royal Green Jackets, you should join that regiment. So on a really a silly little thing, like me being an avid reader of those books and loving that TV series, my brother joined the Royal Green Jackets. So it's strange how things turn. You know, your own personal history, just the most inconsequential thing, can have a huge impact on your life. And who knows, if I'd not persuaded Damon to join the Royal Green Jackets, perhaps he'd be alive today. Probably I wouldn't have joined the Royal Green Jackets. I would never have written Squaddie. So it's kind of strange how these things turn out, and it doesn't show you until 10 or 20 years later where that fateful decision led to. It's a very strange sense of deja vu, really.
And how long did Damien serve in the...
6 years. 6 years. He wanted to leave after 4 years, and I lent on him very heavily to stay in. And really, he stayed in just to please me. I feel selfish about it now, looking back, because I should have said to him, if you want to leave, then leave. But I lent on him heavily to stay, and he stayed in to please me, to please my father, because the family were all so proud of him. And he did another 2 years, and unfortunately, 1 week before he was due to leave, he was killed in a car smash, civilian car smash, but still a serving soldier. So again, fate, that's where it led to. And I was devastated and overcome with grief and guilt. I decided the only thing I could do to put it right was to join the Green Jackets myself. I felt like I owed him a debt of honour, a blood debt, because he had a tough time. He had a tough time. He served 3 tours in the Balkans in the 1990s. People forget this now, but in the 1990s we had a pretty tough old time out in the Balkans, in Bosnia and Serbia, and these areas split apart. And my brother was there right in the thick of it, and he saw some quite dreadful things. And I know he had quite a hard time with it.
Did he talk to you about it?
Yeah, he tried to. But the thing is, I was in my 20s at the time. He was in his 20s. I was quite immature, and my view of the army was like a boy's own adventure story. I thought it was just a wonderful, great adventure. And anybody that didn't think it was wonderful, they must have something wrong with them. You know, they want head examining, because you were getting paid to kick down doors, run round the streets with an assault rifle, and do all this scary, exciting, whiz-bang stuff. I had a very naive, childish view of it. So my brother, he just indulged me. So we'd talk about it, and the conversation would consist of me trying to convince him how lucky he was to be there, and how wonderful it all was, and him trying to convince me it wasn't so great, and some of the things he'd seen pretty horrific. For example, when he was in Mitrovica in 1999, the whole place was coming apart, and he'd patrol down a certain street, had these huge blocks of flats, and he'd go in a block of flats, acting as a UN policeman, peacekeepers, and they'd have to arrest war criminals and suspected war criminals. And you knock on one door, and a chap would say, I want you to arrest the chap next door but one. My brother would say, why? The guy would say, well, he raped my wife and he killed my daughter. So Damien and his platoon of soldiers would say, Jesus Christ, that's outrageous, right, wait there, we're going to go and arrest him now. We'll do that for you. And they'd knock on that guy's door, and he'd say, did you do this dreadful thing? He'd say, yeah, I did. He'd say, well, why on earth would you do such a crazy thing? What came over you? See, what came over me is that guy burnt my mother's house down, killed my father, and tortured my sons. And that's the level of hatred. It was literally neighbour to neighbour, Shakespearean, blood tragedy almost. Even worse than the Palestinians and the Israelis. There's a lot of hatred between the ethnic Kosovan Albanians and the Bosnian Serbs and the Muslim Croats. And the things they did to each other were really awful. I mean, they used to take pieces out of each other and kill each other's families across the street. It's just bizarre, it's surreal. And again, a different kind of warfare to Iraq and Afghanistan, a different thing altogether. And it was like community on community atrocities, really. Whereas in Iraq and the Middle East, it tends to be we're the target. They unite to fight us, as well as having their own little squabbles amongst themselves. But in the Balkans, it was a different thing entirely. So he went through all that. He did 3 tours, over 18 months on the ground, and he had a really tough time with it. A really tough time. I'd see when he come back, he'd lost a lot of weight, and I'd look at the photographs of him, and he looked quite battle weary. He looked quite. When he was alive, I look at the pictures and think they just looked like great action pictures. He's looking very wary and very tough and strong. But when he died, I looked at the pictures and thought, actually, he looks quite cold. He looks quite miserable. He looks like he's seen something bad. He's taken part in something bad. So I kind of had an awakening after he died. And that's when I started to think, I've got to join. I've got to see the world through his eyes. And it's ironic, by the time I joined in 2002, the Balkans conflict was over. So I never got out there, never saw that. But of course, the Iraq war started shortly after. So I took part in the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And I also served in Northern Ireland in 2004. So it's strange, my brother, he never saw those conflicts, Iraq or Northern Ireland. He saw the Balkans. Sometimes it feels like a kind of nice synergy to it. That I wish he was here now, because we'd have so much to talk about. The Royal Green Jackets, my book Squaddie, my service overseas, his service overseas. We'd have an awful lot to talk about. And I think he'd be utterly amazed if he could sit here now. He'd just be shell-shocked. Wow, to read his story, because I dwell on him quite a lot in my book, and I dedicated it to him as well. So it's quite surreal. But I get a definite sense of deja vu that maybe it was meant to be like this. I don't know, it's strange.
You'd started some training with the Royal Marines, hadn't you?
Yeah.
Was that before David joined?
Yes, it was. Yeah. I had laser eye surgery. I was one of the first people to have laser eye surgery in the early 90s in Britain when it came out. And it didn't totally get rid of my short sight, but it improved it vastly. So I could get by without glasses. And so I had the kind of dark and devious idea of joining the Royal Marines and not telling them I'd had laser eye surgery and taking a chance, seeing if I could get away with it. I knew if I told them, they wouldn't let me in. I couldn't attempt to go back to the army because I was already on file as being very short-sighted, and they'd say, well, can you explain this miraculous improvement in your eyesight, because several years ago you were blind as a bat and now you've got near perfect vision. What's happened to you? So I couldn't go back to the army. I had to go to a different service, which really left the Royal Marines, which are infantry soldiers, similar thing, so the Royal Marines. I passed the medical. I was very lucky. The doctor who examined me, he was quite an old doctor, and I don't think he was fully up to date with the latest medical techniques. And he didn't even recognise the surgical scars in my eyes. He just thought I had funny shaped eyes. That's what he said. He just said, you've got funny shaped eyes. How odd. But you can see okay, so I'll let you in. And when I actually joined, I passed the physical, I passed the medical, passed the 1 week potential recruits course. And I've been in training for a month. I was doing very well. Very determined to get the Green Beret, become a Royal Marine Commando. And I thought that was my destiny. Because I do believe they're a wonderful fighting force, the Marines. They really are second to none. And I had a second medical when I was in there. Because when you've been in basic training for a month, same in the army actually, you have a follow-up medical. Because you often get people who join and they're in perfect health at the point of the recruiting medical. They might go out to Civvy Street, they might twist an ankle badly, catch an STD, it happens. Get some minor medical issue, shall we say, which affects the training. So you're given a second medical when you've done a month in training, just to check that everything's okay. And that's when my bad eyesight came to light, because the doctor examined me and he recognised straight away. He said, "You've had laser eye surgery," and the game was up. So I was medically discharged and utterly broken-hearted. I could never rejoin the Royal Marines because of that, but I took a gamble. I deemed it worth the risk, because in life some things are worth the risk. If you have a dream and a goal, sometimes you have to bend the rules to achieve it. We all do. If you want to get to the top in any walk of life, you have to bend the rules, unfortunately. And I bent the rules to join the Royal Marines. I got found out. I got caught. I'm sure there are people that have done the same and not been caught, but I got caught. I was unlucky. So several things happened at once. It was 2001 when Damien died. I was 29, coming up to 30. And I think when a man, well, when anybody turns 30, people talk about the big 4-0, but I think in many ways the big 3-0 is more significant, because turning 30, you recognise you're no longer a child. You are getting older, and you're a man in every sense of the word. But it's a funny age, because even though you're getting older, you're still a young man, and you're still physically capable of doing physically arduous things to a very high degree. But all of a sudden doors start slamming in your face in the world of sport. If you want to be a professional sportsman, for example, anything that requires physical ardour, when you turn 30, doors start closing. Really is lastminute.com. So I just turned 30, and that had an effect on my psyche. I thought, well, I'm getting older now, and any dreams I've got left, I better get my socks on before I'm too old or too fat to be able to do it. So bear that in mind. And then shortly after, we had 9/11, and that was a massive world event. And straight away, we were talking about sending in the forces, sending in the military. And I thought to myself, God, this is really serious. If my brother were around today, he'd be taking part in this. Many of his friends who I'd met at his funeral, Green Jackets, some still serving actually, I thought those guys are going to be involved in this. They're going to be going into Iraq or Afghanistan, wherever it is. And I thought, well, and I'll be 30 years old, still a young man, but very unfulfilled. Sat in my bum at home, watching it on TV, reading it about it in the newspaper. And unlike my brother, I'll be playing no part. But it just kind of started to dwell in my mind. And I thought, do you know what? Again, roll the dice, take a chance, just do it. Go to the Army Careers Office, come clean, be totally honest. Unlike my Royal Marines experience, don't try and hide anything from them, just level with them from day one. So I thought, I'm going to attempt to join the Army. I need to do some military service for several reasons. If I don't do it, for the rest of my life I regret it. I feel like I owe it to my brother as a debt of honour, a blood debt. It's just something I've got to do. It's something I really want to do. I opened my book with a quote from Samuel Johnson in 1791, and I discovered this quote as a child, and it's always rang true for me. Every man thinks meanly of himself for not having been a soldier. It's a wonderful quote that's endured through the ages. And I've met many people, especially the last few years, very successful people with brilliant careers. And many of them said to me, I'd love to have done a few years as a soldier. And these are people who are millionaires, basically. And I understand it completely. And it applied to me. So I thought, it's now or never. I'm 30 years old, it is now or never. So I went to the careers office, I went to Blackpool careers office round the corner. Once again I was turned away for being too old. Went to Preston careers office, got a similar reception. And then I went to Liverpool careers office, which was the home of the Royal Green Jackets, hoping to find someone who knew my brother, and luckily I did. And they let me in. I had to pass an extended medical and extended physical, extended interviews. But it's ironic, because of my previous service in the Royal Marines, that opened the door a little bit, because they could class me as a former soldier returning to service. So even though I'd only done barely 5 weeks in the Royal Marines, those 5 weeks, they put me on the MOD's books as a former soldier. So they could class me as a soldier returning to service all those years later. So it's very strange how things work out and how things happen for a reason. But also, literally, in 2001, when I first applied to join, when I applied to join the Army again, all over, shall we say, they changed the rules on laser eye surgery, and they now allow people to join who'd had laser eye surgery, subject to passing a special medical with an eye specialist in Aldershot, which I did. So all of a sudden, these doors that had previously been closed opened to me, and it felt like fate. The Royal Marine Service came back into account. The MOD medical rules changed. The laser eye surgery problem wasn't there. The only problem remaining was I was over age, because I was 30. But again, the recruiting sergeant said, don't worry about that. Yes, you are over age. The maximum age for infantry is 26. But because you were an ex-Royal Marine recruit, you're a soldier returning to service. It's like someone joining the army and leaving and coming back. So the age rules don't apply to you. We can lift the age rules. So all these doors that were previously closed, all of a sudden in 2001, sprang open, and it felt like fate. It felt like deja vu to me. It really did. I thought, this is where I belong. Clearly, the Royal Green Jackets. It's like a magnet drawing me, and yeah, this is it. So they offered me a 3-year S-type. It's called a short service engagement, and at the end of that you can extend it and stay on if you want, or convert to a regular engagement. So I took the 3-year S-type. I went up to Catterick Garrison and I did all the basic training with a bunch of teenagers, the whole 6 months, and on the combat infantryman's course. And I was the oldest man there by a mile on the basic training. I was even older than my platoon sergeant. The only two blokes older than me were the sergeant major and the OC.
Did you find it hard because you were like the oldest?
Well, physically, I was 30 when I started basic training, 31 when I passed out. Physically, I was at my peak, so there wasn't a problem physically. Because I'd spent all my 20s in the gym, so I was at my peak of fitness. Mentally, it was hard because I was quite a mature, highly educated 30-year-old. Done an awful lot of reading, thought a lot about the world, seen quite a bit of life. So I was quite a mature, well-rounded person in my 30s. And all of a sudden I was having to train alongside teenagers who were not only teenagers, but very, very mature teenagers. 17, 18, 19-year-olds from some pretty rough places. Huge council estates in London, Liverpool, Manchester. Kids from the wrong sides of the tracks. Kids that had extremely tough lives. Now, I come from a solid working class background myself. I'm a Blackpool lad. But these lads, they came from backgrounds that made mine pale. They really did come from some quite rough places.
And what you say, quite high proportion were also from like Commonwealth countries as well?
Oh yeah, I'd say maybe 20% even. There's a huge reliance on Commonwealth soldiers. We have lots of Fijians, Jamaicans, Kenyans, loads of South Africans. By and large, they make great soldiers as well, especially South Africans. Very physically hardy people. There's always a big intake of Commonwealth soldiers. It's interesting because at the time, we're going back 10 years now, the army was undermanned and under strength, and it was struggling to attract ordinary kids, ordinary teenagers, British teenagers. So the Commonwealth recruits almost backfilled. They kind of filled in the gaps. However many extra were needed, we could recruit from overseas. Now we've got the opposite problem. The army at the moment is overmanned. So much so they're looking to get rid of people. I think it's a mistake, but that's another issue. But now it's 100% manned. Back then, 10 years ago, they were pretty much 10% short and struggling to fill that 10% gap. And that's where they relied heavily on the Commonwealth recruits.
And how long did the training last?
6 months. Basically, if you join the infantry, you go to Catterick Garrison, which is the biggest infantry training centre in Europe. It's a very famous place in British Army culture. It's the home of the infantry. The ITC's there, Catterick Infantry Training Centre. And you go there, everybody goes there. Paras, Gurkhas, regular infantry, rifles, everybody goes there. And it's a 6-month course. It's called the Combat Infantryman's Course. And it does what it says on the tin. Basically, it's 6 months of being beasted. In other words, being pushed physically very hard, running up and down hills, firing lots of assault rifles and machine guns, learning how to throw grenades, read maps, to look after yourself out in the forest and things, how to patrol, how to navigate. Just doing basic soldier stuff, infantry style, and learning what it's like to be a soldier. It lasts for 6 months. It's quite a tough course. You get a lot of injuries. Yeah, I broke my foot. Yeah, I broke my foot in the first half of the training, and that kept me in training for a few more months.
Because of the relentlessness of the training.
Yeah, it's the funny thing is, in basic training, you get freak injuries that appear from nowhere, and literally all of a sudden for no reason. I was on a tab, that's a forced speed march, carrying a lot of weight, and I put my foot down, and I felt like a sharp pain in my foot, like a stone, like stepping on a stone. And I completed the tab, which was several miles. It didn't go away. Once the tab was over, and my foot calmed down, and all the adrenaline and blood and heat went away, I couldn't even walk on it. I had to be carried to the medical centre, and I was diagnosed with a broken foot. I had a stress fracture of the metatarsal, and I always remember it because at the exact same time David Beckham got one in the World Cup. So it was the exact same injury, and it was very frightening. Frightening because it came from nowhere. It's not a particularly serious injury if you're a civvy, you've just gone about your daily business. But if you're in basic army training, an injury like a broken metatarsal, one that refuses to heal perhaps, it can end your career. It can mean you get medically discharged. Because in basic training, they have a policy. If a soldier gets seriously injured, they tend to discharge you because they can do it cheaper. If you pass out of basic training, you're then classed as a fully trained professional soldier. You go to your battalion. If you get injured there in your battalion, so much so you need to be medically discharged, shall we say, it's expensive for them to do that. You have to pay your compensation and things. So if a recruit picks up a serious injury, quite often they'll discharge him medically in basic training because it's cheaper. And it means less time in rehab, resources are stretched and things, and the unfortunate would-be soldier goes back home with a very lonely, sad look on his face. And I know all about that because it happened to me in the Royal Marines. Law wasn't technically injured. I know how it feels to walk out of a gate with your bag slung over your shoulder and an utter feeling of dejection and failure. I mean, that's how I felt when I was discharged from the Marines. No fault of my own, but other than the initial lie to get in, it was no fault of my own. It's a horrible feeling because the guy on the gate, he opens the gate for you. He says, "See you, mate. Good luck." And you look at him and he's a trained soldier. You know you'll never see him again. He's passed out. He's okay. And he looks at you and he sees the sadness on your face. And and I'd gone through that in the Marines, and I didn't want to go through it a second time with the Green Jackets. I didn't want to be walking out the gate at Catterick Garrison as one of the failures. It's a horrible expression in life, failure, but there's no other way to say it. I didn't want to be walking out of the place as a failure. And I worked like a demon in rehab. I did everything I was told and more to get that foot better. And thank God, touch wood, it got better and I passed out in the end.
How long did it take to heal?
A good few months, about 3 months. Yeah, and even right the way through until my last day on the CIC, it was bothering me because I had basically, shall we say, 3 months rest, recuperation and rehab, doing massages and stuff and gentle runs in trainers, a lot of gym work, a lot of swimming, standard rehab, and I could protect it and work around it. But when you get chucked back into a platoon that's training towards pass out, all day long you're marching up and down, banging your feet, you're going on the tabs, carrying 50 and 60 pound burgers and things, so your feet are getting tremendous battering. So it took a long time to heal. Even when I got to my battalion, it still bothered me with aches and pains and twinges because it had only just healed when I got back put back into training. So it was still fragile, it was still sore, shall we say, but thank God it didn't break again. It just about held together and it got me through. But there was a few times when I thought the foot won't last because it's very heavy on your feet. We have a saying in the army, a soldier, look after your plates of meat. We call them plates of meat. A soldier lives on his feet. Foot care admin, it's the most important thing. You have to keep on top of blisters, athlete's foot, twisted ankles. You've got to be so careful with your feet. They're precious. When you're a civvy, you don't think about things like this, but when you're in the army and you're having to do tabs and things, maybe 20 miles or so, you're always thinking, will I get a blister? Will my feet hold out? Have I got enough clean socks? Are my boots sufficient quality? What if my feet get wet? Have I packed enough talcum powder? Have I packed some sandals, some flip-flops, so I can air my feet? Walk around camping flip-flops for a few hours, let the air get to my feet. Have I got some surgical spirit? So if my blisters pop, I can get out of cotton wool, I can clean and harden my feet with surgical spirit. it becomes a science, looking after your feet. It really does. And the most extreme example of it is if you look into SAS selection, speak to anybody that's done that, and I know guys that have done that, and the first thing they say is Jesus Christ. Feet, 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 feet. Most important thing. Look after your feet. You're halfway, and if you can look after your feet, it really is that simple. If your feet go, you're screwed, like a car without wheels. So it's. I was very concerned, to say the least. Very concerned.
But you did pass.
I did pass, thank God, in the end.
And then, how long before you went to Iraq?
Several months. Yeah, it's strange going to Iraq because I passed out of basic training. I think it was around about Christmas time, 2002. Had a few weeks leave at home. Reported to my battalion in the new year, 2003. And all the talk was about the build-up to the Iraq War. We all knew we were going, but just talking about it. The Green Jackets initially weren't selected to take part in the first wave of the Iraq War. Battalion 1, they weren't down for that. There's other regiments lined up for it. So we thought, oh well, we've missed that. Maybe we'll be doing a peacekeeping tour a year or two down the line, but it looks like we missed it. In the meantime, I don't know if you can remember, the fire strikes kicked off. So we were taken off all like would-be fighting duty, shall we say, to go and cover the fireman strikes. So I went to Motherwell Fire Station for a few weeks in Scotland, covered the fire strikes and the Green Goddesses. That was my first job in the army. And then when we came back, we went on, I think it's called Spearhead training. At any one time in the British Army, in the infantry specifically, a battalion of soldiers is what's called the Spearhead Battalion. What that means is that battalion is trained to a very high status of readiness, and it's on standby 24/7 to deploy to any trouble spot in the world like that within 24 hours, anywhere in the world, any emergency that happens, and that's why it's called the Spearhead Battalion. It's a very arduous training package. It's a very responsible, important role. So regiments only stay in it for 1 year max, and if they get a call out, they're actually out doing the job. Someone else becomes the new Spearhead Battalion. So some regiments are on it for a few months before they go somewhere, and then there's a new Spearhead Battalion. So in 2003, our job was the Spearhead Battalion of the British Army. So we did a very intense training package which lasted for a couple of months. Consisted of very long tabs, up to marathon distance, 26 miles. Lots of live fire training in the Brecon Beacons and up in Scotland in the hills and things. Just basic infantry bread and butter stuff. Lots of runs and lots of gym work. Getting ourselves to a peak of physical and military fitness and preparedness. That took a few months. Now it's very restrictive being on spearhead duties because you've got to be ready to go anywhere 24/7. You have to have your mobile phone beside you switched on all the time, no excuses. So what tends to happen is it can be a good number. Once you've done all your training and you're ready, the CO will say to his OC, your officer commanding, who's in charge of a company of soldiers, he'll say, right, okay guys, you've worked hard, well done, I'm proud of you. Now chill out, relax, finish early every day if you want, go and see your families, have some days out and things, maintain your fitness to a high level, maintain your skills to a high level, but I recognise as a commanding officer, this is a very restrictive lifestyle, having to have a phone there on 24/7. So in return, and out of recognition of that, you're going to have an easy life. You've done the hard training. Now you're going to have an easy time until you get called out for real. Just look after yourself and keep fit. So it's quite relaxing and liberating when you're on spearhead and the training's behind you. You have an easy time with it, really. It's like being on downtime a lot. A lot of time just playing football in the gym and stuff. So this went on for a few months, and we said to the CO, are we likely to get a deployment anywhere, do you think? He said, well, we might be going to the Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo. He said, because there's been lots of trouble around there recently with the elections and things, and they need some UN observers, and they've got these tribes constantly killing each other. So if we go anywhere, it'll probably be the Congo. And it's interesting, there's still trouble in the Congo now. It's never stopped, really, and this is 8 years later. So we thought, oh, the Congo, that's interesting. What about Iraq, sir? He said, no, I very much doubt you'll go to Iraq, because there's other regiments taking care of that. The war's now over. Peace appears to have set in. And there's other regiments down for it. So there's probably not going to be any need for you to go to Iraq. So unfortunately, we probably missed that one. Well, how wrong he turned out to be. Because, as we all know, The Iraq War started in March 2003, lasted a month or two at most. A devastatingly successful campaign, a complete victory for us, with minimal casualties. Brilliantly fought campaign. And it was very successful. That was Octalic 1. And then the initial months after the Iraq War, there was a lull, there was a peace. We now know it was a vacuum, a power vacuum, but everything went quiet. The streets were deserted, there wasn't any riots or anything, it all went quiet, calmed down. In the initial euphoria that Saddam had gone. But then after a couple of months, this insurgency started to appear from nowhere. The first explosions, the first casualties, a few isolated dreadful incidents such as the Red Cats, the RMPs being cornered at that police station and massacred by that mob. A few very bad incidents happened to us and to the Americans in the north, in Baghdad. And things started to change very rapidly. And it started to unravel. And so we were on our leave. We had a week's holiday. Phones on standby as usual. And I got a phone call of a friend of mine. He said, Mac, he said, pack your kit and make sure you're back at camp first thing tomorrow morning on parade. That's what you're talking about. You're joking. Still got a few days of leave left yet. He said, Mac, we're going to Iraq. His spearhead has been called out. We're going to Iraq. I said, no way. Didn't believe me. He said, Mac, swear to God. He said, this is my job. I'm calling everybody in the company. I've got to ring everybody up and say, come back to camp. So, yeah, he was telling the truth. So we got back to camp and we had a big battalion parade next day. And the CO said, well, guys, he said, while you've all been on your leave, enjoying your rest and relaxation with your families and having a nice time, I've been out in Iraq doing a recce, an advanced recce, and speaking to military commanders on the ground. And there's been a very sudden, very sharp deterioration in the security situation. And the spearhead has been called, and we're going out there next week to try and put a cap on things and calm this insurgency down and get a grip on stuff. So, boys, we're going to Iraq. You've got 1 week to get ready. We're going to Iraq. We were stunned. We were just absolutely stunned because nobody thought we'd be going out there. And so, yeah, a week later. Yeah, and it was quite surreal in a way. Quite surreal.
How did you feel like that week before you were going?
Very apprehensive and nervous because even the climate's changed now. Bear in mind we're talking about 9 years ago, 2002, 2003. So much happened in that time, Iraq, Afghanistan, that people aren't surprised anymore. But back then, I think the perception was in the media and in politics and in the army, the perception was, we've gone to Iraq, we've had a very, very successful, very popular war, shall we say, especially the Americans, achieved a great victory. And now it's just a couple of years peacekeeping at most. And that's it, no dramas. Afghanistan, for the first couple of years, again, a very short, successful initial campaign, welcomed with open arms, everybody's happy, the bad guys, Taliban have gone, and happy days ahead. That's what people thought. They were so naive and misguided at all levels. So we were kind of shocked, and for the first time I started to think to myself, because even in the army, even though you're a soldier, and in theory you are trained very highly to prepare for combat and stuff, it's drilled into you. Back then, not now, but back then, you never really thought you'd go and see anything like that. You never really thought deep down you would really be involved in anything dangerous. It didn't occur to you. And we were wrong, massively wrong as it turned out to be, because for the last 8 years we've been involved in some ferocious action in the Middle East, and this is the beginning of it, Iraq 2003. So for the first time, even though I was a soldier, I sat down and I thought, wow, I'm now part of this. I'm not just an armchair general or a critic or an interested civic reading about it in a book, someone else's story, or reading a journalist's opinion on it, or watching the news and seeing what some big reporter's got to say about it. I, little old me, Steve McLaughlin, I'm now part of this, and their problems are now my problems. The Sunnis, the Shias, the Kurds, Al-Qaeda, etc., the Fedayeen, Saddam's secret police. These people now, who before were just an abstract, alien concept to me, thousands of miles away, over the sea. Yeah, I'd read the books and watch the news, but I wouldn't make an emotional connection to them. Hey, I'm here in England, in Blackpool. I know what my life is. I don't know what your life is out there in Iraq. It ain't my life. Never the twain shall meet. All of a sudden, you realise that you are now becoming a part of their lives, and vice versa. Not only that, you're becoming an enemy to them. You're going over there to patrol on their streets, wearing the uniform of a British soldier with a Union Jack on here, carrying an SA-80A2 assault rifle. And in every sense of the word, to them, a lot of them, you're a symbol of the enemy. And I thought, wow, there might just be in some dusty shack in the middle of God knows where in Iraq, a bullet with my name on it, on a shelf somewhere, just waiting. There might still be a bullet with my name on it, who knows? Probably not in Iraq, somewhere else maybe. You never know, do you? Until you find it. But there might be a bullet there that's been waiting for me for years, gathering dust. And it might say in it, in invisible ink, reserved for Stephen McLaughlin, 2003. And it's quite an odd feeling thinking that there might be a bullet with your name in it somewhere in the world, and you're actively going out to meet it. So yeah, I was quite nervous and apprehensive about it.
Was it Basra that you liked?
Basra, yeah.
What was your first initial impression?
Amazing heat, incredible heat. The flight wasn't very long, I think about 3 hours. And I remember there was a lot of kind of bawdy, squaddy humour going on. There always is on these types of occasions, on the plane and the journey there. I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to let anybody down. I really do not want to let anybody down. I was under no illusions. I was some great, heroic, VC winning type soldier. I just didn't want to let anybody down. I thought, if I can just do a good job, not screw up, not mess up, not F up, as we say in the army, if I can just do a good job and come back in one piece, I'll be happy. That's all I asked for. And I was very concerned that I would do a good job and not let down my comrades. Because you start to feel a burden of responsibility. You start to realise, you grow up quickly, you start to realise that it's not just yourself you have to worry about. You've got a mum and dad back at home. They're worried about you coming back. Especially if you've already lost a son, as in my case. So you've got family back home who are concerned about you. And you've got your comrades around you. And your comrades, they've got family. And it sounds bizarre. I'd look at my friends' faces and think, I'm concerned about your parents. I don't want your parents to be devastated and upset to turn into raging alcoholics because I screwed up and contributed to your death because I wasn't doing my job. So I actually started to think that the responsibility went beyond my fellow soldiers to their parents. I'd look at a soldier and think, he's just got married. He's got a young child back at home. If anything happens and we're together, I'm going to do my absolute best to make sure he goes back. Then, when I look his wife in the face again, she's not looking at me thinking, Mac, because of you, my partner's not coming home. So it's kind of, you start to feel quite responsible. I did anyway. Maybe because I was so much older than everybody else. I started to feel a sense of responsibility towards other people. I also started to feel a sense of wariness and anxiety, a little bit of stress about some of the more immature members of the battalion, because we tend to get very young recruits into the infantry, very young, I'm talking teenagers. Some of them only just turned 18, and immature 18-year-olds. And you know what it's like when you're 18, you think you're going to live forever. When you're 18, you think you're bulletproof. I know I thought that. If I had joined the army at 18, I'd have been a different soldier to joining the army at 30. I'd have been a lot more immature and cocksure, a lot more full of myself, look at me, I'm the big man kind of thing. So, but by the time I joined, all that had left me. So, because I'd grown up. So I was concerned about some of the more immature ones around me. I thought, I hope you realise, Sonny Jim, this is serious. This isn't an exercise. This is for real. And make no mistake about it. Some of these people that you're going to be interacting with hate your guts. They'd love to kill you. They'd love to get you in a wooden shack, stick you on YouTube, and cut your head off on air live. They'd love to do that to you. Keep that thought in your mind, because that will keep you alive and stop it happening. Don't start taking careless risks and thinking you're bulletproof and streetwise out here, because you're not. You can't speak the language, you don't know the geography, you're a stranger in a strange land. Yeah, you're a soldier, you're carrying a big gun, big deal, it means nothing out here. You get kidnapped, you're gone, you're dead. So I used to think about that a lot. I used to have deep concerns about some of the young men around me who were very mature. It really used to worry me.
The first week you were there, it was like an induction.
Acclimatisation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did that entail?
Again, just really being shown around camp, getting settled in, cleaning weapons, making sure everything's okay. Whenever you go somewhere, you go through what's called a handover process, because usually one regiment leaves, one regiment arrives. There's a crossover period, so you'll spend a week or two with the battalion, the resident battalion that's there, and they'll show you certain things that you need to know. You go out on some patrols together, you get to know the local hotspots, things like this, just the local culture. You call it the POL, the pattern of life. You get to know the pattern of life of the area you're going to, and you observe it. So there's a crossover period, and when you go into a country that hot, my God, you need it. It was so hot, it was unreal. When I got off the plane, I actually thought that there was kind of like a bit of residual air coming from the engines. And this guy from the RAF who helped us with our bags, he said, no, he said, that's not the engines. This is how it is. And it was 7 o'clock at night. He said, it's cooling down now. It was so hot, it was unreal. I'm talking now September in Iraq. It was like a furnace, like an absolute furnace. That heat, if we'd just gone out on patrols on the first day, all kitted up, we'd have probably, even the fittest amongst us would have collapsed with heat exhaustion. You need that week to acclimatise your body. And for a lot of that week, you just sleep and drink water and sweat like a dog. You're just getting used to it. Gallons and gallons of water, because it's a very, very hot environment, very hot.
Was it the first phase of tour? You were mainly doing stag duty?
Yeah. We did a lot of stag, and that never stops.
What's stag?
Stag is guard duty. It's the bane of the life of the everyday infantry soldier. There's no escape from it. Everybody has to do it. And basically, wherever you go, Afghanistan, Iraq, wherever it is in the world, you will do lots and lots of stag duty. And basically what it means, it's just there's a fortified post on the edge of your camp, usually fortified with sandbags and things, and maybe even a really big brick wall if there's one around. And you'll stand behind it with your rifle and your night scope and your binoculars and your radio, you and a colleague or maybe in your own. And you'll observe the area. You'll observe the daily pattern of life. You'll look out for anything unusual. You might greet visitors to the camp, let them in and stuff. And you'll challenge people who shouldn't be there. And it's just preserving the security and integrity of the camp, making sure nobody gets into it that shouldn't get into it, making sure nobody can mount an attack against you. So it's essential that you have, it's sentry duty, you have to have alert sentries. But the nature of it is, it's a very, very boring task. Even in a red hot conflict zone. In the army, wherever you go, it's 90% sheer boredom, 10% sheer adrenaline. Most of the time, nothing happens. And it's very, very boring, especially on stag. And it can get very long and lonely. At night times, you start to see things or you start to hallucinate because you get very, very tired.
Just yourself on stag, or is it two?
Sometimes you're on your own, sometimes there's two of you. It depends on the threat level, depends on where you are. It's best if there's two of you because you've got someone to talk to. And to be frank, if you start to fall asleep, someone's there to wake you up. And vice versa. It gets incredibly tiring. It really does.
How long would it, like shifts?
It would vary. You could do like 5 hours on, 5 hours off, 4 on, 4 off. If you were lucky, you might have a more normal shift where you do, say, a couple of hours on stag, then a good long period off, say 7 or 8 hours. You have a proper sleep, then a few more hours. It depends on how much manpower you've got, what tasks people are on, because there's busy periods and quiet periods. If it's a quiet period, there's more men, we call them bods. There's more bods to spread around the stag duty. There might be 10 guys to cover stag, going doing a few hours each. If it's a busy period, and everybody's out on patrols and stuff, then there might only be literally a couple of guys to cover stag over a 24-hour period, instead of doing it between you. Then it gets tiring. So it depends on the available manpower.
You also had like Iraqis working in the camp.
Yeah, lots of Iraqis. We had a nickname for them. They were called Choggies. I'm still not sure to this day quite where the name comes from. We call them Choggies. Choggies or flip-flops, because they always wore these really kind of like cheap beach sandals. Flip-flops, we call them. Again, a bit racist. Ragheads. Ragheads was another one. Just derogatory squaddy names. That's what happens in the army. That's the humour. And yeah, most of them were fine. They were like chatterboxes, full of energy, and it was strange because this was late summer into winter of 2003, and at that time, relations between the locals and the military was still, to a certain degree, civil. The big breakdown hadn't really occurred. The complete breakdown occurred in 2004, after we'd left. But when we were there, it was just about holding together. Well, it was starting to strain at the seams. Yeah, there was they were employed by us, they were paid by us. And they were paid over the odds. They only paid a few dollars a week. But a few dollars in Iraq is a lot of money in certain areas. So they were deliberately well paid. And there was a lot of competition for the jobs because they all wanted one. They needed work as well. They were quite well looked after with meals and things. I think as far as it goes, being an Iraqi in Basra in 2003, if you could get a job in the airport, you were considered one of the lucky ones. You could bring a few dollars home to your family and stuff. Some bottles of water and things off the camp. You could look after yourself and your family. It was quite a good number to be on for the locals. But towards the end of our time there, a lot of stress and strain crept into it, and we had to really sharpen up because you get people trying to come into camp without passes who shouldn't be there, and you'd be worrying if there would be terrorists and things doing the recce of the place or trying to plant something. So, by and large, we had good relations with them. But again, we had a few. In any group of people, in any job, you get a few bad apples. And certainly in the Royal Green Jackets, we had a few bad apples. The same as you have in any area of life, the police, the ambulance service, there's always a few bad apples. And it used to upset me because some of them, they'd be quite nasty to the locals. Nasty in not a humorous way. Nasty in a humiliating way. And even though a lot of these guys couldn't speak our language, they'd pick up on it. To put it bluntly, you know when someone's taking the mickey out of you. When someone's taking the pee out of you, you know, whatever the language, you understand body language and things, tone of voice. And some of our soldiers, a few of them, were quite nasty to the locals. And again, I was concerned because I thought, my philosophy is, listen, hey, I'm selfish, I just want to stay alive. I'm selfish. If we can keep on the good side of these people and look after them, gain their sympathy and support and respect, they will look after us. That's how human relations work. That's how good business works. Good military business, good commercial business. That's how things work in life. It's the best way. That was my philosophy. So I was very respectful to them, and I'd have a laugh and a joke with them when I could, whilst keeping a professional distance and maintaining authority. But some of the lads were quite derogatory and quite nasty to them, mickey taking, and enjoyed humiliating them. And it really annoyed me, because some of these guys, they were old enough to be our fathers. And I think, listen, this guy you're taking a mickey out of, he's 50 odd years old, okay? Who are you? You're a 20-year-old squaddy. And you're talking to this guy like he's an idiot. His hometown. He's lived here all his life. He's probably fought in the Iran-Iraq war. He's probably got sons older than you. He probably speaks a couple of languages. Who knows what he was before this war began? He may well have been a bank manager or something. Just because he's cleaning this back gate with a brush in his hand, don't talk to him like he's some kind of idiot. To the contrary, I would say you're the idiot. That was my feeling. I had a few little arguments with some guys on the back gate.
At least one of the Iraqis did speak English.
Oh, unbelievable English. Yeah, they surprise you. People can surprise you. You should never prejudge people. Yeah, there was one guy in particular, and he spoke impeccable, perfect English, and I formed a kind of friendship of sorts with him. And one of my friends tried to rip him off. We used to barter. We were told not to barter with these people, not to buy anything off them. People do. We'd buy generals' epaulets and things, dinners, Iraqi currency, Iraqi currency, with pictures of Saddam on. We'd buy little souvenirs off them to take home. We weren't supposed to, but we did. And they were very happy with it because we paid them a few dollars, and to them it's a lot of money. We get some nice souvenirs. Everybody was happy. Encouraged good relations, business. who weren't supposed to do it. Even the officers would say, "Don't do it," in public speeches. Then they'd come down to the back gate and say, "Oh, can I buy some of these captain's rank slide off?" Even officers would do it. He'd say, "Don't do it," and then they'd do it, typically. So we had a good little deal going, a good little thing going, everyone was happy, but a few people tried to spoil it. A few people took the mickey. They'd arranged to do a transaction with a guy. "I'll pay you $10 for some rank slides, epaulets, and some dinars, some local merchandise. I'll pay you a few dollars for it." The guy would bring it next day, and the soldier who'd done the deal with would renege on the deal and say, "I'm not going to give you $10. I'll give you $5." Which is it's a huge drop. It's a 50% drop, and these guys would take offence, understandably. So it was very upsetting to me, because I thought, no respect for these. I used to think, that could be my dad there, that could be your dad there, that could be me there. How would you feel if some cocky young kid with a gun in the uniform was taking a mickey at you in your country, in your backyard? You'd feel grossly offended, and rightly so. So just pay the guy. You said $10, give him $10. It's nothing to us. It's just peanuts. But to this guy, $10 is a lot of money, maybe a week's food. So give him $10 for Christ's sake. But what can you do? You have to work with the people you work with. So we had a few bad apples. We did have a few bad apples.
So another incident we talk about in the book, when you're on the stag, I think it was at night, and you were late.
Yeah, I got into a fight with a friend of mine.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah, it was very upsetting. When you're on an operational tour, it gets very stressful. People get stressed. People get anxious. You start to get homesick. Start to feel resentful. All kinds of emotions bubble under the surface. Maybe they've got a girlfriend or a wife back home who they're worried about. And I was very close friends with a guy who shall remain nameless. And I'd done a lot of favours for this guy back home in England. And on one occasion, I was late for stag. And the reason I was late was an NCO had asked me to do some work for him. And the NCO told me he'd cleared it with this kid I was going to take over from the stag. And when I arrived late on stag, it was only 10 minutes or so, I apologised profusely straight away. I explained the corporal has asked me to do a job for him. That's why I'm late. I'm here now, so go and enjoy your rest. And the guy just went berserk. He attacked me with a loaded rifle, basically. He butt-stroked me. Basically, when you butt-stroke someone with a rifle, it's you basically you attack them with the rifle. With the butt of the rifle, you can either thrust it or swing it like a baseball bat. And he came at me like a baseball bat with the rifle, swung it at me, and I was able, luckily, to block it. And we had a bit of a scuffle on the back gate, and things calmed down. And he went back upstairs, and he entered his rest period, and I entered my stag period. But when the stag was over, I went upstairs and I attacked him. I initiated a fight with him. And the reason I did this is because if I had not done that, if I had not stood up for myself and drawn a line in the sand and said enough, it would have happened again. Because in the army, what you have to understand, in the infantry anyway, there's a lot of teamwork, a lot of friendship, mutual support and respect. There's also a lot of competitiveness. It's a very masculine environment, almost hyper-masculine. It's a very aggressive environment. A lot of testosterone. It's like a wolf pack. And the weak people get attacked. In the sense of, if you get any group of men together, especially young men who are often immature in that environment, it brings out the best and the worst in them. It'll bring out the hero in some, it'll bring out the bully in others. Well, this particular character who attacked me, it brought out, shall we say, the bully, his nasty side. And I had to counter that, because if I had not fought back and stood up for myself, I'd have gained a reputation in that regiment as what we call a platoon bitch. Platoon bitch is a nickname that's given to a soldier who's considered weak. And I'd have ended up making endless cups of tea, cleaning up after everybody, receiving the occasional slap, the occasional butt stroke, and becoming a victim of bullying. And it does happen. It does happen, sadly. It happens more than you might think. And when it happens, it's usually because the soldier hasn't stood up for himself. Because it's like any environment, they'll test you. They'll test you. I'd imagine if you get sentenced to prison, in the early days, you'll be tested. A few people, they'll see how far they can push you. And if they keep sensing they can push you, they'll go all the way. So you have to fight back, and same in the army, you've got to fight back. Even against your own comrades within that unit, you have to fight back. And so I fought back. One of the saddest days of my life, I didn't enjoy it. I got into a hell of a lot of trouble over it. So much trouble I had to transfer platoons. I was moved to a separate platoon from him. And we never spoke to each other again, really. And it was very sad. But I had to stand up for myself. I was in an environment where if I hadn't, it would have happened again. He'd have done it again and again and again. And before you know it, whenever anybody has a bad day, which we all do, they're looking for a punch bag to take it out on. Where's McLaughlin? Where's McLaughlin? There he is. So,
when you moved to the other platoon, how did you find how did you find the other platoon?
Absolutely fine, no problems at all. The thing is, in the army, you have to remember, is the army it only ever rewards strength. It doesn't respect or reward weakness. It rewards strength. So, military men are moved by show of strength. And when I had that fight, I stood for myself. In their eyes, I'd shown strength of character, strength of physique, really. And it actually boosted my status. People were a lot more wary around me. They were a lot more nicer to me, a lot more respectful of me. They'd ask my opinions. Just talk to me as an equal. Because I'm a quiet guy. I'm talking a lot now because you're interviewing. In my normal everyday life, I'm a quiet guy. Quite a mature guy. I like to read a lot of books. I like to write. That's what I do. And I was like that in the army. Always reading. Always, keeping a journal, a diary. Quite an insular person, really. And that can be perceived as weakness by some people. Such as the guy who attacked me. And so all of a sudden I was given a new nickname. I was no longer Old Man Mac or Grandad. I was now Mad Mac or Tyson. I was given these silly nicknames, really, out of recognition to my new status, because I'd stood up for myself. And I was never pushed around or bullied again. Nobody even tried to own me, because they knew, you try and bully Mac, you take the mickey out of Mac, go too far, he'll batter you. He'll batter you. That's Mac. Treat him with respect. And that's how you want to be treated in the army. Because the alternative is you're viewed as a platoon bitch, sadly. It's not pleasant, but it's real life. That's the reality of it.
The platoon that you moved to, they weren't doing stag, were they? They were on
platoons had a rotation of stag, patrols, and other stuff. They'd already done a stag rotation, so straight away I was taken off the stag. And although I had to do a bit later on, to do the odd shift here and there. But yeah, they weren't really doing a stag rotation, so.
You meant the patrols, did they?
Yeah, patrols, escorts.
How did you find that?
It was great to get out on the ground because I was getting cabin fever, shall we say. Excuse me, I was getting very claustrophobic, stuck in camp all the time, and dying of boredom, to be frank. It was nice to get out and start to see a bit of Iraq, to interact with the locals, to get a feel for the place, the politics, the culture of the place. Our main task was escorts. What we do is any VIPs. A VIP could be a colonel, a general, a diplomat, an oil executive, a journalist. Any VIPs that needed to get from A to B, we'd protect them. We'd act as bodyguards, escorts. So they'd get in maybe an armour-plated Range Rover in the middle, and either side you'd have Land Rovers with armed soldiers acting as escorts. We'd take them where they needed to go. When they got there, we'd get out, we'd act as bodyguards for them in the background, watching over them, then we'd take them back to camp safely. That's the idea. So it's called escort duty. We did a lot of escorts all over the place, day after day. Funnily enough, I had some fantastic times doing that. Real amazing, saw some amazing sights, because in Iraq at the time, there was a lot of oil wells on fire. And I referred to them in my book. It's like giant candles in the sky, because that's what they were like. They were like giant candles that dotted the horizon endlessly. And they were beautiful in the daytime, even more beautiful at night time. And so we really saw some quite moving sights on a spiritual level almost. Every now and again we'd get out of Land Rover, we'd go on a patrol through a town or something, or a village, or just accompany this character, this guy, wherever he was going to. And we saw some amazing sights, saw some awful sights, some shantytown areas, some very poor, impoverished areas. But we'd stay in different areas like the salt marshes, and we'd drive a lot to Nasiriyah and Shaiba, drove all over the place, all over Basra, beyond Basra. And it was just nice to get out and about and to see the country. It really was. We were fortunate in the sense that the winter of 2003, the insurgency was just beginning. It hadn't taken hold. We'd have 1 or 2 serious incidents a week. By the time we left, there was 1 or 2 serious incidents a day. But it was like a transformation period. When we arrived, it was relatively quiet. It got worse, 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 worse and worse. When we left, it was the beginning of chaos.
You also worked with some Danish forces.
Yeah. We stayed for a while on a place called, the army has nicknames for everything, Danebat, short for Danish Battalion. They had an area called the Salt Marshes. They kind of controlled it. That was their area. They had a large battalion of soldiers covering several miles around the Salt Marshes. That was a really good experience because we got to go out with the Danes a lot as well.
How long were you there for?
Well, I think it was maybe a month or something like that. Yeah.
A welcome break.
Yeah. It was a good few weeks. It's so long ago now, it's hard to remember. Yeah, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. But it was a welcome break. It was nice to see how other soldiers worked, to get out on the ground with them. And although we played very much second fiddle to them, it was their area, they were in control and command. We tended to go where they wanted to go to. We'd kind of accompany them and back them up. It was nice. It was a nice camp. We didn't have to do any stag duty, thank God. So we got to sleep at nights properly. So we were sport really. We were quite sport. It felt luxurious compared to what we had at Basra. And yeah, it was a great experience. Seeing the salt marshes, beautiful. Very shabby, but quite beautiful. Especially in the early morning, all the mist would rise off the desert and these salt marshes, and it was really a sense of being alive, very special. And then at night times, the view was incredible. You'd see all the oil wells burning like giant candles. And sometimes you'd go on what's called pipeline patrols, because at the time, well to this day even it's still a problem, bandits would sabotage the pipelines to siphon oil out and things, just for sabotage purposes, Al-Qaeda, or for criminal purposes of getting cheap fuel for themselves. Either way, we'd have to try and stop it. So we go on pipeline patrols. And we'd go through these deserted kind of oil compounds at night time and stuff. But you've got these quite scary, quite creepy, because you'd have like lots of big buildings all built up, and you'd have to patrol through them. And you'd be looking at the windows and stuff like this, thinking a sniper rifle was going to come out of a window at you, and you'd be like, you have to have 360-degree awareness. But at the same time, it was once you kind of cleared the buildings and they were clear and you felt they were safe, you could enjoy the scenery a bit more, whilst remaining switched off, having your eyes still looking around. And you could enjoy it a bit more though, and it was just nice because you get this warm breeze, even in the middle of the night, a warm breeze, and you could feel the heat coming off the oil wells, and it was almost surreal. Like it was like a moonscape. That's how I refer to it in Squaddies. It's like a moonscape, like a lunar landscape. Felt very alive, felt very young. We'd because I was a Land Rover driver, so we'd drive for miles and miles on a deserted highway, and every now and again the NCO in charge just said, "Pull over, Matt, just stop, do a quick patrol around here." So we'd pull over, turn out the lights, we'd just do a short patrol. We'd come out, D-bus, come out from Land Rover, and just maybe go, for a few miles, a short patrol. And we'd just stop and wonder and stare at the scenery. And we'd get back in Land Rover, and you'd feel like the cool breeze on your face at night time. Not a living soul out. Very special, very, very special time. I'm sure on my deathbed it'll be a scene that plays through my head again. My life flashes before me if it does. That'll be one of the flashpoints that comes up. Basra at night.
What was it like driving in Basra?
Oh well, depends where you go. If you go downtown, it's pretty chaotic, very chaotic. It's like a Blackpool promenade, the height of summer season. It's a chaotic place, grimly chaotic. It's there's no laws of traffic as such. In England, we've got strictly enforced traffic laws, traffic lights and things. In Iraq, there's none of that. Well, I think there used to be, but after the war it all just fell apart. So, no traffic wardens, no police, no enforcement. It was like Dodgems, like a free-for-all, like a Mad Max movie. Driving my Land Rover down those streets, it was just every man for himself. It was just chaos. It was just... I did things in that car that if I did here, I'd get locked up for, and rightly so. Nudge people off the road, bang into things, go the wrong way down roads, cross over Central Reservation, and just, because you can do this in Land Rover, and just drive down the wrong side of the street. I'd only do it for good reason, evasive tactics, if we were told by... I wouldn't just do it for fun, you know. My commander would say, Mac, stop the vehicle, turn it round. I was following his orders. I wasn't just doing it for fun, but it was fun, I have to say as well. That was a bonus. But yeah, it's just... People... In a place like Iraq, 3 words spring to mind. Life is cheap. Life is cheap. All life. Human life, animal life, insect life. Life is cheap. And that attitude was summed up in the attitude to roads. It's just... You know, people getting knocked over and things, and dead donkeys and stuff, and livestock at the side of the road, and just a sense of garbage piles, horrible smell that never left the place. You just got a sense that life was really cheap. Nobody gave a hoot. People used to drive how they wanted to drive. They wouldn't indicate the cars falling to pieces. Like a free-for-all. And I just got the sense of, out here, it's kill or be killed almost. You have to really dominate the road. Otherwise, you will get dominated and you'll be run off the road. It's a horrible, horrible way to live and exist, and a horrible way to drive your car. But over there it's normal. That's how they drive in Iraq. Deeply disturbing.
What was it like maintaining the
Every day we just did checks. You know, you check the oil and the water and the fuel and stuff, and that was my job as a Land Rover driver. I had to do that. You just keep it well maintained. I mean, out there, the cars would have failed an MOT 20 years ago. They were just held together by bits of string. You'd get cars that were like 1975 Datsun Sunnies. The front was lime green, the back was purple. Clearly a different car welded together, and it was just crazy. It was just... so my vehicle was like a tank compared to their vehicles, which was a relief, and it gave you a feeling of security, because you knew if some idiot crashed into you, and frequently they'd nudge into us and stuff, their car would crumble and not yours. You know, you were probably quite safe in the Land Rover, but they wouldn't be so safe in their little old banger. But that's their problem. If they're going to crash into you and drive like madmen, well, hey, they paid the price.
You had at least one contact, didn't you?
Yeah, we were driving back from a party of all things at Basra Palace. We had to escort some diplomats there in the middle of the night, and it was billed as a very important job when we got there. It turned out to be a bit of a party, shall we say, an unavoidable journey. And on the way back, we got contacted. Some guy tried to stick an RPG in the back of the Land Rover, and luckily for us, my NCO was very switched on, and he started putting some rounds down. And I was quite angry about that, because I realised I could have been killed. And it was all for nothing, really. 2003, it was a transformative time in the sense that people were doing things they shouldn't have been doing. And it's always happened in the army. There's always been a divide. You've got the infantry. We were infantry, Royal Green Jackets, on the ground, doing the hard work, the dirty work, patrols, escorts, stag duty, security duty, arresting people if need be, quelling riots if need be, doing the hard, dirty work, real soldiers' work. That's infantry. And then you've got a rear party element within the camp that does important work that, shall we say, a little bit more glamorous, a bit more removed from the action, like intelligence work, analysis. It's very important, needs to be done. We're at their beck and call, really. We'd be often woken up in the middle of the night, or taken off a task we were doing. You've got to take this guy from the Intel Corps to Basra Palace. You've got to take him to Shaiba Logistics Base. You've got to take him here, there, everywhere. We didn't mind doing it. If the guy needs to go somewhere, he needs to go somewhere. 9 times out of 10, these tasks were genuine. We'd be doing a real job. You know, we'd take a guy somewhere, and he'd get out in the back of the Land Rover, and we'd listen to him talk. He'd be meeting a tribal elder or a local village chief, They'd be talking business about how they were going to rebuild the area, kind of thing. Didn't mind doing that. And then we'd take him back to camp. No dramas. That's what we're there for, to do a job. But occasionally, especially at night times, some of the rear party elements, shall we say, would forget where they were, because they weren't going out on the ground every day and seeing the tension and the rising potential for violence. You could sense it in the air. There was a lot of tension on the streets, and we could see it, we could sense it. People's attitude towards us would change, and they'd become more hostile towards us, more volatile. And you can only sense that by getting out on the streets yourself and patrolling like a policeman might do. You see, you need to get out on the beat and walk around and talk to people to sense it. A lot of these intel guys and rear party people, they never did that. For them it was all office work. They didn't get out on the ground. It was like academic theory. So we'd start taking these guys here, there and everywhere. And I felt we were taking increasing risks, unnecessary risks, especially at night times. Because the problem is, Basra, as big a city as it is, there's only so many routes in and out, especially to Basra Palace where our main base was. And we go backwards and forwards to Basra Palace all the time. And it got after a while that every single road he'd gone down, there'd been an IED, improvised explosive device, blow up on that road, or an attack or an attempted attack on British soldiers down that road by snipers and things. So there's only so many main routes in and out. Now the locals, they know this place like the back of their hand. So they got to be able to predict which routes we'd go down. Now we'd try and vary our routes. One day you go one way, the next day the other, and vice versa. But even using what we call good skills and drills, varying our routes, trying not to set up a readable pattern of life for the enemy. Well, if there's only 3 routes into town, they know they're only going to get lucky one time out of 3. So the odds are against you. Sooner or later they're going to get you. Well, on this one particular occasion, we were woken up pretty much in the middle of the night and told to take these 2 guys to Basra Palace for a very important intelligence briefing. Our initial reaction was, well, how important can it be? I think it was about 10 o'clock at night. You know, it's 10 o'clock at night. We know, because we've got it every day, Basra Palace is pretty much shut down now, apart from the guys on guard. How important can it be? How necessary is it for these 2 guys? I think one of them was a colonel and one of them was a diplomat of some sort. How important is it for these 2 guys to go to Basra Palace tonight? Risk us, risk our security, risk their safety. Is it really necessary? We questioned it beforehand. We were assured by our platoon commanders, yes, it's come down the chain of command. It's absolutely necessary you take them there. So you take people at face value. So we took them there. No problems on the way there. Lo and behold, we got inside Basra Palace, parked up outside these very luxurious houses, because Basra Palace is where Saddam Hussein and his family used to live whenever they came to Basra. And it was actually a compound. You had kind of like a central palace, which is very luxurious. And then within the palace compound, shall we say, there were several outhouses, which like you class as your standard big mansion in England. Nice mansions on the outskirts of the compound, of Basra Palace compound. So we drove up to these houses on the outskirts of the compound, which is where people stayed, where people were living, you know, during our occupation of Iraq. Straight away I thought, hang on a minute, if they were discussing business, we'd be taking them to Basra Palace itself. We'd be taking them to the offices, because we've got offices in there, with intelligence officers, with infantry soldiers, reading maps and things, collating reports. You know, why are they discussing business in this house? So, anyway, you know, what are we? We're just poor bloody infantry, we know nothing. So, we dropped them off. They went in the house, and we could hear the sound of laughter, people drinking, music, like a party. Not a wild party in the sense of a British street party or, you know, like a Christmas party in someone's house. But, shall we say, a very social gathering. And I'm being diplomatic here. A party. Basically, it was a party. So, they were having a nice old time, drinking and no doubt catching up on old times, having a good old chinwag and a waffle. We were sat outside, guarding the vehicles, twiddling our thumbs, feeling increasingly resentful and peed off because A, we'd had no sleep that night because of this stupid task, which was avoidable, and B, we were going to have to drag them back from Basra Palace to Basra Airport in the early hours of the morning and face possible danger. Because the locals aren't stupid, they can hear music, they can see when lights are on, even over the wall of Basra Palace. That's basic. That's what I mean. It's funny, these people, often intelligence officers and stuff, it's all academic theory to them. You go on these courses, it's all theory, it's chit-chat. But unless you actually get out on the ground, as an infantry soldier doing the job, you miss lots of things. It's like if you're a policeman and you want to control an area, you can do it two ways. You can sit in an office and read reports all day, or you can get your street clothes on and go undercover plain clothes and start walking around and talking to people and sniffing the air, observing things, pattern of life. That's where you get real intel from. Now, as infantry soldiers, we were doing that every day. But a lot of these guys are stuck in the offices. And they felt totally safe because we were looking after them. But we had a different view. And anyway, lo and behold, that night, sod's law, we were driving back to camp and we had a contact. Someone tried to RPG us. And it got quite fast and furious in that Land Rover, I can tell you. It was a pretty scary place to be. And when we got back to camp and it was all over, very harsh words were exchanged and a few home truths from our commanders were given to their commanders. Such as, next time you effing well want to go to a party, do it in your own time. Book a helicopter. But don't go waking up our guys in the middle of the night to go on your stupid jollies, chinwagging about, oh, what a lovely war it is. Because there were people in 2003 who were still naive. Because it hadn't yet erupted. Because it was still contained. And most of the time you were pretty safe moving around and about. A lot of people got a bit relaxed, a bit naive. And they thought that, oh, it's okay, it's not going too bad, we can relax a bit here, we can drop it down a gear. No. Sound before the storm. And so very angry about that. Very angry. We were all very angry that night, we really were, because we felt we'd been placed in danger by, not to put too fine a point in it, amateurs, people we considered to be amateur soldiers. Amateurs. That's what we thought of amateurs. We were the infantry, we knew what was best. And they wouldn't listen to us.
You must have felt quite, you must have felt quite constricted yourself, just being a driver, because, all you can do is drive.
Yeah, I was, all I could do really was absolutely put my foot down and floor it, and believe you me, I did. I drove like Michael Schumacher that night. I've never driven as fast before or since in my life. Thank God the roads are pretty out. I absolutely flew out of there. All I could think about was, any second, this Land Rover is going to blow up. It's going to turn over, it's just going to go bang, and it's going to be rolling through the air. And I'll either wake up in the middle of a burning wreckage, or I'll not wake up and that will be it and I'll be dead. Or I'll wake up, God forbid, and I'll be being dragged out by some local ragheads to go on YouTube. All these things were going through my head. All these worst case scenarios, but I just got out of there as quickly as I could. Yeah. It's funny, in a situation like that, you become hyper aware. You become alert to everything, every single sound, every sensation in your body. I could even feel the hairs on the back of my arms literally go I could feel my eyes, pinprick vision, lasering in, getting tunnel vision on the road. I could sense everything around me. And that was with my friend next to me. He was firing his rifle. And it was weird because all my arms were like getting hot and stinging, I could feel these stings all on my face and my arms. And I thought first, what the hell is that? Have I been shot? Have I been hit? Are we on fire? Because I could feel these stings, hot stings. And out the corner of my eye I glanced, and it was the rounds ejecting from his rifle. Because when you fire a rifle, rounds, obviously, brass shell casing, we call them shell cases. It's like a brass cartridge that holds the round. It ejects out the side. And his rounds were ejecting, really, because he was putting down the whole magazine, he was flying out. And they were all going in my face.
What was he firing?
SA-80 A2 assault rifle. And all these rounds, because he was so close to me, they were going all over my arms. And when we eventually parked up a few miles down the road and it was over, in the footwell of the car there was like a pool of empty brass cartridges, shell cases. They were red hot to touch. And that's what the stinging was. But at the time, I thought briefly, maybe, I've been shot or something. I thought, have I been shot? Because obviously I've got friends who have been shot, and I've spoken to them and stuff, and they say it's most serious injuries, you don't realise how serious they are at the time, especially not when the adrenaline's flowing. It's only afterwards when the action's complete and you stop and calm down, then you're like, oh shit, my arm's come off. You know, that sounds bizarre, but that's how things happen, you know, when you get really hurt. And so yeah, I was, you know, when we stopped and I you know, sort of checked myself over, I was very, very relieved to discover it was only just some burns from his rifle. Yeah, very noisy as well. It's that close. A lot of people don't realise, a lot of soldiers, in fact one of the biggest problems we've got with Afghan veterans, they're coming back with some serious neurological problems, and it's because when a loud explosion occurs, or a rifle, even just a rifle, goes off in close proximity, the sound is unbelievable, especially if you're firing it. I mean, it ricochets around your ears. You're supposed to wear ear protectors and things, but obviously you can't wear them if you're out on patrol and get contacted. You're meant to wear like these ear protectors. And a lot of soldiers, especially soldiers who do full 22 years, they get deafness later in life. They get deafness. And I know a lot of guys who come back from Afghanistan and they're having to get support from medical services because they've been in close proximity to grenades going off and stuff. They've not been fragged, they've not been hurt by it, but the ears have literally been rattled. And some of these guys are coming back and they're half deaf because of the noise and the shockwave of being so close to a weapon when you shouldn't be. That's another issue.
This contact happened towards the end.
Towards the very end of our tour, and that was another concern of mine because history has shown us, even to this day, going back to the days of Northern Ireland, most soldiers get killed in two phases of an operational tour. In the beginning of the tour, because they don't know the area, they don't know the ground. With the best will in the world, you're learning as you go along. You make one mistake, you're dead. Okay, so a lot of soldiers tend to get killed in the early days of a tour, and then towards the end of the tour. Because towards the end of the tour, people start to relax. You start to switch off. You start thinking, oh, only 2 weeks to go and I can go home. Oh, I'll book holiday to Spain with the missus. I'll go and buy a new Xbox. I'll relax. I'll do this. I'll do that. And the mind starts to switch off a bit. Not all soldiers, but some soldiers. So towards the end of the tour, there's a kind of natural winding down and a slackening off. And that was a concern of mine as well. I didn't want it to happen to us. It didn't happen to us, to be honest. We were really switched on from day one to the end. We were switched on because we knew where we were.
But the battalion as a whole was, I mean, very lucky in some
Yeah.
respects that you didn't have any casualties.
Yeah, we were lucky. I'd love to say it was to do with skill. It was partly to do with skill, but a lot of it was to do with timing. As I've said, 2003, the winter of 2003, or Battalion 2, which is what we did, it was a strange time. It was the very beginning of the insurgency. So most of the time we'd only have contacts once or twice a week at the most. When we left, it was getting every day, but we missed most of that. So it was just timing. The battalion that took over from us, I believe, lost several men, wounded and killed.
Which battalion was that?
I think it was LI. I think it was light infantry. Again, a superb, fantastic regiment, our sister regiment. And the only reason they took those casualties and we didn't was because when they took over, it started to go belly up. That's when it really came off the rails. That's when it really started to. We tried to keep it together, but when we left, it just fell apart. And that wasn't because we'd left. It was because there was a massive insurgency that was engulfing the whole of Iraq, from Baghdad to Basra and beyond. There was a huge insurgency, and no battalion or unit of men could have served there and not taken casualties on a big scale. So we were lucky. We went there in 2003, a relatively quiet time. That's why we didn't take many casualties. Yeah, we got a few guys with injuries. We had a few guys get close shaves. A friend of mine was doing an escort job in Basra, and some lunatic chucked a grenade in the back of his Land Rover. Luckily for him, the grenade was a very old one, and it wasn't a very good one. It did go off, and he got shrapnel wounds to his arm and his elbow. Had to have some minor surgery. That was it. If it had been one of our grenades, that whole Land Rover would have been, everyone in it would have been toast. So he was lucky in the sense that it was an rusty old thing that was chucked in the back of his vehicle. We were lucky. We were very lucky. Our same regiment, obviously I left by then, we did another tour in 2007 and we lost about a dozen guys. So that tells you how it changed. And I have a friend who's a journalist on The Independent, and she interviewed me a few years ago, and she told me she'd done every single optelic from the first to the last. I think it was about 13 optelics. And she said each successive optelic, every time you went, there was more and more armour, more and more tanks, more and more warriors, more helicopters in the sky. The soldiers were becoming more heavily armoured. You could visibly see, we call it hardening, it's called hardening. You could visibly see a hardening of the environment with armour. Every time you went there, you could see. And it's funny, when we arrived in Basra Airport, there's limited security. Midway through our tour, the Royal Engineers came down, and they put in these huge concrete blocks that blocked access to Basra Airport. You had to go through like a kind of a maze to get there, you had to steer through. And the reason they did that was to stop the suicide bombers attacking the airport, because when we were there, we used to go to the Italian camp an awful lot. I think it was in a place called Nazaria. We used to go there every couple of days on escorts. And we got quite pally with the guys on the gate. And by sheer good luck again, we'd gone there, we got back home safely. The next day, some suicide bombers attacked the Italian gate in Nazaria. And they killed about 25 Italian soldiers. It was a devastating attack. And how they did it was, they did a two-pronged attack. They got a big 4-ton lorry to kind of ram the gate, to damage the gate. And that went off. That was like a distraction, if we like. And then shortly after, a tiny van loaded with even more explosives, that shot through the side of it, rammed through the final defences, and that detonated, and that was a real big killer. So they'd done a two-pronged attack. So after that, all the bases around Basra were hardened up and armoured, and Basra especially so.
How did you feel when you left?
An immense sense of relief, a real sense of relief. I felt a sense of pride as well. When I say pride, I think we made a mistake invading Iraq. I think it was the wrong thing to do. I think we invaded it for the wrong reasons. And I don't think we should have done it. I think it's made our country less safe. I think it's made the world less safe. And I think it's made Iraq into a worse place than it was before. And it's always been bad and always will be. So I think the Iraq war itself was a huge mistake. And I'm being kind using that word. Politics aside, I felt an immense sense of pride on a personal level to be a soldier in a regiment like the Royal Green Jackets, which is a great regiment, a historic regiment, got about hundreds of years. I felt like I'd been part of history, like just a tiny little piece, a tiny little cog in a great big wheel, but nonetheless a tiny piece. And I thought, well, I've earned my right to say something here, because a lot of people talk about it, journalists and reporters and things, from, shall we say, a privileged perspective. But I actually served in Iraq at all as a soldier on the ground with a great regiment, an infantry regiment. And I feel a great deal of pride about that. I feel like a small part of history. Because it was a transitional time as well. I served in Iraq in 2003, the winter of 2003. And I saw the very beginnings of an insurgency that goes on to this day. So I saw the beginning of a conflict. So on an historical level, I'm a bit of an amateur historian, that moves me personally on an historical level. Then in Northern Ireland in 2004, I had the opposite experience. I saw the very end of a conflict, the winding down of a conflict. So I saw the beginning of one and the end of another. So I feel on a historical level, even though both of those conflicts, shall we say, were dubious conflicts to start with, nonetheless, historically, I feel quite moved that I can say, yeah, I served in Iraq, I served in Northern Ireland. I saw the beginning of one war, shall we say, and I saw the end of another war. And it's a very, I feel it's a privilege to be able to say that. Forget the politics, the rights and wrongs of it. It's nice to be able to say you played a tiny role, just a small, tiny role in historic events. Because a lot of people walking around the streets, they read papers and watch TV and stuff, but with all due respect to them, the spectator, shall we say, there's a difference in being a spectator and a participant. And I felt, coming back from Iraq certainly, I've been a participant in something. I've taken part in something that's historic, that's important, that will shape the world, that will be spoken about for decades to come, that will be written about by future historians and pored over and analysed. Should we have done this? Should we have done that? Was it wrong? Was it right? Etc. etc. And I was actually part of that. And I now have a very strong opinion on it. I feel I've earned the right to have that opinion by dint of my service. And it's nice to be able to say that. And ironically, I've even written a book about it. So it's even more deepened, ingrained in me, shall we say. So yeah, I felt a real sense of pride and purpose.
You said at the beginning of the interview, before joining the army, you had a very much saw the army as a boy's own adventure. How did your experience of the training in Iraq change your view of army life?
One thing I'll say about this, the army, what I learnt, I joined the army at 30, the infantry, at 30 years old, an elite infantry regiment. Now, it's a young man's game. That's not really a good decision for the average person to do that. I had special reasons for joining the army. My brother, lifelong ambition, going back to that quote by Samuel Johnson, every man thinks merely of himself and not having been a soldier. I'm pretty certain if I'd not joined the army, I would have still have forged a reasonably successful life for myself and found professional fulfilment in my work as a teacher, as a writer, whatever it is, or whatever else I'd have ended up doing. So for me, I had to do it. It was an itch I had to scratch for me personally. But I would describe myself as not an ordinary man. I'm not your average everyday guy. I don't tend to do things that the average everyday guy does. I do things most people would say, that's crazy, don't do that. I do it, that's me. But one thing I learned, it's a young man's game. I want to say it's a young man's game. In an ideal world, if you want to have a full army career, which is 20 years plus, you should join at 18 or 19. And you should leave at 39, 40. And it's set up that way for a reason. Because physically, it's a very, very arduous existence. You get a lot of injuries, lots of twisted ankles, lots of strained hips and things, and banged knees, lots of broken bones, and knocks and bangs and bruises. And that's aside from the horrific injuries you risk in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. It requires a lot of energy, a lot of physical energy, which only youth can provide. And it demands a lot of emotional, psychological energy. It's a perfect job for a young single man. And by the time you get married and have a family in your 30s and get a bit older and more mature, you should be in a management position. You should be a sergeant major or warrant officer, stepping back, taking a more backseat role. Still being up front, but not quite so up front as the young fellas are, the platoon sergeants and things. It's structured that way for a reason. So I'd say to anybody thinking about joining, if you want to make a whole career of it, join at the right age, because it really does take a lot out of you. It's a very demanding profession. A lot of guys get burnt out. They couldn't serve longer than 20 years if they wanted to, because they get burnt out. It's like being a professional footballer. You can only play for so long. You can only play so many games. And if you carry on too long, you run the risk of limping around like a cripple when you're older. You've worn out your knees, you've got no cartilage left, and you become prematurely aged. So it demands a lot of you. Physically, it demands an awful lot of you. So it is a game. I hesitate to use the word game, but it fits. The army is a game for young men. It's a game for young men. Young men who think they're going to live forever. Sometimes that can be an advantage, because when you get older and mature, you worry about things too much. So one of the difficulties I had was joining at 30, especially in the ranks as a recruit, is I was fully formed. I've read a lot of books, I've had a lot of education, I've been a manager in Civvy Street. And I was a square peg, shall we say, in a round hole. If I'd been able to join as a teenager, I would have accepted the brainwashing with more glee, because you are brainwashed to a certain extent. You have to submit yourself to it totally, body, mind and soul. And when you're an independent individualist, and I consider myself to be an individualist, it's hard to submit yourself to that regime, especially if you don't agree with some of the things. I was offered a commission in basic training to the Adjutant General's Corps, and I turned it down because I joined the army to be a proper soldier, which to me is an infantry soldier, a Royal Green Jacket or a para, a Royal Marine, whatever it is, but an infantry soldier. That's what I wanted to do. If I'd taken the commission, transferred to a different corps, had an easier life, shall we say, I would have considered staying in. But doing the job I was doing, it's a job for young men. If I'd have stayed in, I'd have been looking at being a 50-year-old regimental sergeant major, if I'd got that far. A 40-year-old platoon sergeant, half killing myself to keep ahead of a bunch of 21-year-old private soldiers. Because you've always got to be at the front. A good soldier, a good leader should lead by example. And in a regiment like the Royal Green Jackets, it's expected. If you're a sergeant, if you're a senior NCO, you're expected in your platoon, quite rightly, forget your age, to be the fittest man in that platoon, with the strongest stamina. So I'd have had to maintain my level of fitness and conditioning right into my 50s. It's a lot to ask, because you do pick up injuries as you get older. I was 30 when I joined. I did my 3 years. I decided to leave after that. I got a very good reference, brilliant testimonial. I could have stayed. They wanted me to stay, but I felt 3 years was long enough for me. I'd scratched that itch. But it's a job for a young man, not a middle-aged man. It's a job for a young man.
Do you regret not taking the officer training?
I've often thought about it, because it would have opened up the military to me in a different sense. Because I always say there's two armies within the army. There's the army of the ranks, which I was part of, non-commissioned officers, and then there's the army of the officers, the commissioned officers. When you're a commissioned officer, you can manage your career. You can pick and choose what you want to do. You can go to language school. You can go to the Defence Intelligence Agency and learn things. You can customise your career almost. I would like to have done that. I would like to have been able to say, I'd like to do this and do that, not do that, miss this, miss that, but do this instead. As an officer, you can do that. There's lots of things you can do, and you can request certain educational courses and things, and you're allowed to go on them. As a private soldier in the ranks, as I was, you're totally powerless. Totally, you're like a leaf in a stream of water. You go where the current takes you. You've got no say over your career. Physically, it's a lot more arduous as well. That's why it's so much shorter. A soldier's career is now classed as 22 years, 22-year career. A perfect career in that 22 years, you go from private soldier to regimental sergeant major. Join at 18, retire at 40. That's you finished. An officer's career is 35 years. So you join at 21, young second lieutenant. You leave at 56 as a general, if you get that far. If you want, you can even stay longer. You can get extension. There's several serving generals in the British Army who are over 60 years old. Because once you become a full colonel, you don't have the same demands on your body. As an officer, you need to be physically fit and leading from the front like an RSM up to the rank of lieutenant colonel, which is the commanding officer of the battalion. Typical CO is about 40 years old, 41, been in for 20 years, lieutenant colonel, CO of a battalion. He'll hold that appointment for 2 years, and then when he leaves that appointment, he'll get promoted to colonel, full colonel. That's a staff job. He'll go to London at the MOD, and he'll spend a lot of his time behind the desk, to be frank. He'll still get out to Afghanistan and places, but he's more of a planner, an overseer. He's kind of at brigade level, he's hanging. That's when guys start to put weight on things, and you do see some of these rather portly looking generals and things. Believe you me, they might be portly at 60, but when they were 40 years old, they were CO, they were fighting fit, the same as anybody. But there's no need when they get to that level. They don't need to maintain that level, because they're being employed for this. The brain power and experience, not necessarily fitness.
You've talked about you writing a book. You kept journals throughout training. You found it quite a cathartic experience.
Yeah, it's weird how the book came about. When you join basic training now, a compulsory requirement is what's called a best book. All it is at the end of each training day, you're meant to write down just maybe a short paragraph on what you've done that day. For example, today I learnt how to strip and assemble an SA-80, and I learnt how to throw a grenade on a grenade range. End of. I found that my diary entries were becoming pages and pages and pages. Excuse me, because I found it very cathartic and I really enjoyed it. And at the end of the day, the idea is the platoon sergeant, platoon commander will come round your line, we call it the lines, and they inspect your lines. And your best book, with your kit, is often laid out on your bed or in your locker. And he'll just pick it up. Look at your best book, McLaughlin. He'll have a look at it. So you had a good day. Okay, well done. And that's it. But mine was already becoming like a book. And he said to me, McLaughlin, bloody hell. Doesn't need to be a book, you know, just a paragraph or two at most. We don't need to know your life story. No one's interested in it. But it planted a seed. It planted a seed in my head. And I really enjoyed it. And I didn't think what I was doing was anything exceptional until I got to basic training. My first day in basic training, I was calling my platoon sergeant's office. And he said to me, he said, McLaughlin, I can't believe your age. What the hell are you doing here? He says, you are the oldest ever crowbag recruit I've ever seen. 30 years old. You should be a sergeant now. You should have been in for 10 years. It's ridiculous. He said, I looked at your CV. You've got exams coming out your ears. You're a manager in City Street. What the heck? Why are you here? Tell me why you're here. Because I'm confused. And so I told him. And he said, okay, well, no special favours. As far as I'm concerned, you're the same as everybody else. And he was right. But it was bizarre because I was even older than him. And I had corporals commanding me who were like 23 years old. Sometimes even younger. And his concern was, how would I take that instruction? Would I rebel against it? Well, no, I just took it on the chin. And I really enjoyed it. But that's when I started to think, maybe this is a little bit exceptional. Maybe what I'm doing here, the journey I've had, the previous attempts to join the military and the rejections, the death of my brother, the fact that I'm joining in my 30s under such unusual circumstances, this is a little bit exceptional. So I decided to just keep the journal going, keep the diary going, and just write about it. And when I got to my battalion, I kept it going. And of course, when we got to Iraq, hell, even today, 2011, all these years on, when you turn on the news, it is still front page news. Iraq, the war on terror, it is still a really big news story. And it probably will be for many, many more years. And it's history, it's historic. I'd always wanted to write, always been an avid reader. I didn't know what to write about. When I was in Iraq, it was like a penny dropping in my head, and I thought, you know what, Stephen? Sometimes life and circumstance places you in a situation, in a place, where it all becomes suddenly clear. And I thought, this is it. Look at where you come from to where you are. Here you are, you're 31 years old, in Iraq. A year ago you'd managed a shop. You had a wonderful brother, God rest his soul, he's now dead. Fast forward a year, you're now in Iraq as a professional soldier. I never thought that would happen. Your brother's dead in the ground. God, it's like weird. It's just so strange how all this has come about. And I thought, write about what you know. This is it. This is what you should write about. Two things. Your story, your journey to this point, taking you through the army in your 30s as the most unusual soldier and the most unlikely recruit. That's one part of the story. And the second part of the story is just chronicling history, because I felt a very powerful sense of history. What always annoyed me, and it still annoys me a bit to this day, is you see journalists on television talking about Iraq and Afghanistan and speaking as if they really know how it feels to be a soldier, but they're not soldiers. They've got a very privileged position. They sleep in the command tent with the colonels and the officers, and they're viewed as senior officers, and they're not patrolling with a rifle down the streets, and so they think they know what it's like to be a soldier, but unless you've actually been a soldier with that rifle, you don't know how it feels. And I thought to myself, this is history. Everything that you've undergone, from basic training in the 21st century to your time here in Iraq, this is history. So write about it and get it down. And I felt like fate placed me there. I had the skill to write about it. the knowledge, the experience. And I thought, just write about this. Write about this. And if you survive this experience and get out, maybe it could become a book. And that's what happened. And how I structured Squaddie was, in the first instance, I talk about my brother's story, and what made him join the army, what made me join the army, and our struggles and things. So that's the emotional subtext, if you like, the story of two brothers. It's not really an army story in many ways, it's about brotherhood, it's about me and my brother. That's beneath every sentence from the beginning to the end of the book. So that was the subtext of the story, about two brothers and their journeys as soldiers and men. But then I thought, what would have been useful to me joining the army? Write the book that I would have liked to have read before I joined. Because I realised once I joined how little I knew. I thought I knew a lot about the military. I realised when I became a professional soldier, I knew nothing about it. And I'd spent some time with the Royal Marines, I'd had a brother who was a soldier, I'd read scores of books, but I realised, despite all that, I knew very little about the army. But I didn't realise that until I became a soldier. So I thought, well, write the book that tells you everything. Because it sort of struck me as absurd. The average person on the street, the average civvy, they know more about what it's like to be in the SAS, tabbing for 100 miles, diving through windows and things, and getting in firefights in caves with Al-Qaeda and all that crazy stuff. They know more about that, or what it's like to be a general commanding thousands of troops and tank battalions and tank columns into battle, than they know what it's like to be an everyday ordinary infantry soldier. And when you turn on the TV and you see those guys in Afghanistan or Iraq out on patrol, they're just ordinary squaddies. And they represent 90% of the army. And all that stuff we read about in these books and these films we watch, about these Rambo-type characters, that represents that much. It represents 0.001% of the army. The average soldier will get nowhere near remotely anything like that kind of action. So I thought, well, write about and celebrate, embrace the experience of just an ordinary infantry soldier. And that's why I called it Squaddie. You buy a book that's called Squaddie, you know it's not about a guy who was in the SS for 20 years. You know it's not about a guy who was a colonel in charge of horse guards at Buckingham Palace. So that's why I called it Squaddie, because it's what I was. And I wrote about the basic training regime at Catterick Garrison, that 6-month CIC course, on a microscopic level, what it's like to do that 6 months in the 21st century. And then what it's like to be a soldier in the peacetime UK. Daily battalion life and culture, the drinking, the fighting, the exercises and the Brecon Beacons, the day-to-day existence of your soldier in the peacetime UK, behind the wire, on a barracks. What really goes on. Because again, people don't really know. So what about that? And then, when you go abroad on operational tour, what it's really like, the good bits, the bad bits, the anxieties, the stresses, the fears. So everything really, at home and abroad, from basic training to the end, the complete life cycle of a typical infantry soldier, a private soldier, which is all I was. I was a rifleman in the Royal Green Jackets. I wasn't a trooper in the SAS, I wasn't a commanding officer or anything like this. I was just a rifleman, a green jacket. So I just wanted to celebrate and explain that whole experience. So someone that's never been in the army, got no idea about it, if they've got a kid thinking about joining, or they're thinking about joining, hopefully they can pick up a copy of Squaddie, they can read it, put it down and say, right, I know exactly what it's like. I know exactly what it's like. When my son comes home, and he's a bit down the dumps, he's a bit surly, a bit depressed, maybe he's got a black eye, and he's going out getting drunk, I know why he's doing it. When my husband comes back from a place and he's a bit morose maybe, a bit down the dumps, I know why. You know, so you get an understanding of what it's really like to be a soldier. Because I've never come across a book before that's really portrayed the Squaddie experience, which is what, for most of us. And that's what I try to achieve in writing Squaddie.